From the author of The Girl in the Video and House of Bad Memories comes a dark comedy of errors and toilet humor. Wentworth is at his wits' end. He has no money. His cat has been kidnapped. And every time he tries to kill himself, he fails. Worst of all, he lives in Kidderminster. But sometimes you are given a lifeline. For some, it's a lottery win. For others, a promotion. For Wentworth, it is an out of shape 50 something named Norman wearing an I was on Naked Attraction t shirt and scuffed Reeboks. Wentworth thinks he's in luck, but makes a series of progressively worse decisions and soon finds himself on the run from a gang of criminal reprobates. The two flee to Norman's holiday home, but there's a local serial killer on the loose. Something messed up is happening next door, and Norman is becoming uncomfortably clingy. Can Wentworth evade the criminal mob, shake off Norman's advances, and uncover his neighbor's secrets before he falls victim to the approaching serial killer? Daddy's Boy is Shameless meets Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman with the incompetence of The Hangover.
So I wanted to start out talking about not the book Daddy's Boy that we're here for, but actually wanted to go. I just wanted to jump into really quick. You recently started a Patreon for your writing career, separate. So, like, obviously, you're the host of This Is Horror. You've been hosting that for longer than anybody's been hosting a horror podcast, except maybe like the guys at Pseudopod and stuff like that. But I'm not 100% sure. But so recently you launched your own Patreon, and that's specifically in support of your writing career. So this is Michael David Wilson and that lane, not This Is Horror and that lane. So what do you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, I thought that it would be a good idea to have something distinct from This Is Horror, particularly because recently there is an argument that actually what I'm writing, you could say, this isn't horror, this is dark comedy. And especially with the latest release, Daddy's Boy, which is the most comedic thing I've done, it just felt like this is an area that will mean that I don't necessarily have to restrict myself to horror. I think too, yeah, a number of years ago, I condensed everything into one place. So instead of having a Michael David Wilson profile and a This Is Horror profile, everything is under the same umbrella.
Yeah.
But I thought, that the more I get into writing, and this is my fourth book now, the more there is an argument to actually have some separation, particularly when what I'm writing, it's dark fiction. It's dark fiction with horror elements, but it isn't 100% horror. So I thought, let's go for a Patreon. Let's have this as the place. There's a free tier, there are paid tiers, and it's also a place of experimentation. And people who have been following me for long enough know that I like to experiment with different things from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm doing is, like, a big part of that is the audio walk and talks, which kind of, as the name would suggest, whilst I'm walking around Japan, I am talking on creativity, on writing, on something in that arena. And a lot of the topics, they will come from questions from patrons or things that are of concern, either for me at the time or within the writing community as a whole. And I think one of the things that people look to me for, particularly because of my editing, is for writing advice. That is part of it. So this is another avenue that I can have with the Patreon. It's also a place where I can completely showcase my fiction. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I'm doing is I am reading a chapter from House of Bad Memories every week. I had wondered about putting this all together with the This Is Horror Patreon, but I I kind of didn't want to upset like long-term patrons that were interested in me interviewing horror writers, but they're not
Mhm.
necessarily interested in the Michael David Wilson fiction. And I think, of course, there is a big crossover between people who like my fiction and people who like This Is Horror podcast, but it doesn't completely overlap. So I don't, for people who want the Michael David Wilson stuff, there's this place. For people who want the This Is Horror stuff, there's another place. The other concern I had though was like, goodness, I don't want there to be people who are paying to be a This Is Horror patron, and then they're like, hang on a minute, MDW, you've put some other stuff that I wanted behind a paywall. So that is why, on one hand there's a free tier, but on the other, I've said, look, if you're a This Is Horror podcast patron and you see something on the MDW Patreon that you want and it's behind a paywall, reach out to me, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to cater to give people more of what they want, but in the places where they expect it and they want it. What I'm not trying to do is double charge
Right.
loyal fans or loyal members of the community. So it's just trying to navigate that balance, I suppose. But yeah, as my writing career becomes more serious, so do the different places where I can showcase what I'm doing. So the MDW Patreon, it's very active in terms of the amount of content, for want of better phrasing, that I'm putting out. I'd say I'm putting things out at least 3 to 5 times a week. There's a lot of the audio walk and talk. There's the videos of me narrating either a chapter from a book, House of Bad Memories at the moment, or a short story. And then there's other little bits of news or goodies. So recently, I just said, for anyone who's a patron at any level, here's a code to get the audiobook of House of Bad Memories in its entirety, which is narrated by Aubrey Parsons, who is a professional narrator, not just by me. In in my, can you call this a home studio? It's a home office. It's in my home and it's an office, so we can call it that. But the idea behind even the video recordings was, I kind of called it an unplugged garage recording. I was thinking like the grunge bands like MTV, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden. They just do a kind of raw
Right.
acoustic session. So this is just me narrating it in a raw garage setting. So I didn't know if it would be popular. In truth, I still don't know if it's popular, but this is what I mean about, let's experiment, let's see what people want. So another thing that I've said is, if there's the demand and if I can get to 100 patrons and this is what the people want, I will start writing a novel in real time and putting it up for the patrons. This is something that I'm confident that I can do because I do write pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it would be interesting for people. I think, in much the way that Josh Malaman has an amazing documentary, which he hasn't released yet. Come on, Josh, we really want to see that. I mean,
It's good. It's
I've
good.
seen it. Okay, you've seen
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We've seen it, but the people want to see it. It
I'm
deserves.
gonna one up you though, because I watched it in
Yeah.
Josh's house. So
Yeah, you did interviews around the house, so
yeah.
yeah. But it's such a good documentary, and much like Josh Malaman, but without the money or massive fan base yet. Yeah, we're working on it. You know,
Hmm.
I like to do these creative experiments, and I think why not write a novel live and see what happens? And also, you know, if that's the direction I go in, probably what I'll do is I'll be like, right, there's 3 ideas that I have. Vote for the one that you want me to write live for the
Yeah.
patrons. And yeah, it would be completely starting from scratch. This would not be, I've got a work in progress. No, this is brand new, and we're going to see what happens. And we're going to see too how does doing it for a live audience affect the dynamic?
Yeah.
It's something that Chuck Palahniuk did, again, more famous and with more money, but you know, fake it till you make it. Try and emulate the life that you want. And he wrote Greener Pastures that then became shock induction. So I think this is a very interesting route, because what you're giving the patrons as well, it was Substack in the case of Chuck Palahniuk.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Check it out. Uh, what you're doing is you're giving them a unique and an original edition of the story, because I'm sure that by the time you publish it, it won't be exactly what you put out.
Right.
And Greener Pastures, I believe, is actually pretty different to what shock induction turned out to be. You know, we saw with Haruki Murakami, the Wind Up Bird Chronicles was initially a short story. So I love these ideas, these experimentations. I mean, Josh Malaman, again, he kind of did a similar thing with Carpenter's Farm during the
Yep.
pandemic. I don't know if he's going to release a different version at some point too.
Yeah.
Only Josh knows that, and maybe
Yeah.
his agent and Del Rey.
I have no
I
scoops
don't.
on that one,
You
but
don't know that one.
no,
You
I don't
didn't
know that
ask
one.
him that question around the house, did you?
No, I didn't. Um, well, no, and I like that. I think that having a separate space for your own writing pursuits is probably good, because like even at the very base level, like the goals of the podcast and the goals of you aren't always going to be in alignment. Um, so, and then like, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of it, but the idea that, you know, some people who are subscribers might be like, why is this guy just throwing me this stuff when I showed up for this stuff? Yeah, that totally makes sense. But either way, it's just it. I love it, and I think it's a great idea, and I love the experimentation of it, and but the thing that comes to mind is like, man, you just gave yourself a whole lot more work.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be something that I have historically done.
Yeah,
Yeah, the amount of challenges that I was set. I mean, really, I think that the year that was game changing for my writing was 2016, when I set the one story per week challenge.
yeah,
Because before then, I'd been on and off. I've always been writing, but it hadn't been a regular thing. There had been a lot of self doubt and imposter syndrome, but really it was what Stephen Pressfield calls the resistance. It's just kind of voices in your head telling you that you're not worthy, that you shouldn't do this. And Ray Bradbury said, "Look, it's impossible to write 52 bad short stories in a
yeah,
row." As I think I've said before, I thought, well, okay, challenge accepted, because either I'm going to get more confident with my writing, or I'm going to have proven Ray Bradbury wrong. Either way, that sounds like an achievement. So that is what I did for the year of 2016, and I haven't stopped writing since. Is was a game
Yeah.
changer.
Um, well, I think that you, among other people, I think it might have even been a conversation with Josh Mellerman. This isn't anybody listening or watching. We're not just going to constantly invoke Josh Mellerman. It just happens to be relevant. I promise. But like the whole idea of like the success is like you made it when you made it. I think was the sentiment, right? Like creating the thing, that's the success, that's the payoff. Whatever happens after it is what happens after it. But like having that mindset of like when I sit down to record a podcast, I'm not like, ooh, I need at least 300 people to listen to this or 500 people or 1,000. I'm like, ooh, I need to have a great conversation with Michael. And then that's the win. And then afterwards, people listen to it, they listen to it.
Yeah, Josh said that making it is making it.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, for many years, my kind of mantra that I repeated a lot on This Is Horror was you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. And I
Yep.
feel that this year, as I've really looked at what's important to me with art and with creativity and with the publishing business, I've kind of got a new mantra, which is if you can find joy in the pursuit of creativity and writing itself, then you win every time. And
Yep.
I'm trying to use that mantra to guide what I do. And I mentioned this a little bit off air, but essentially, what I am doing in pursuit of joy and happiness and fulfillment is I make sure that I start every day with writing. That is the priority for me. Because if I do that at the start of the day, then I've kind of won the day, whatever happens. And I did experiment with, well, what happens if I start with more marketing or with emails that might result in commerce and sales, because it's nice to create art, but I would like to make a living or make a better living. I was just miserable. I was just more depressed. So I think if I start the day with art and creativity and I let that lead me, then I will be happier. I don't know if I'll be richer, but I will certainly be happier. And I would be willing to bet, and I think I have bet kind of my whole life on this really, that I will win in the end through doing it this way, because I'll certainly be more authentic. I'll certainly write more books. As I'll be a happier person, I'll hopefully be a nicer person to be around. Dan Howarth might argue that that's not the case. He's always taking the piss out of me, but we don't need to talk about Dan Howarth any further on this podcast. Apart from Last Night of Freedom was one of the best books of last year, and everyone should go and pick it up if they haven't already.
Seriously, so good. Yeah.
Very,
Uh,
very good.
um, yeah, that he Dan. Not that we're going to take this over to Dan, but that was I don't know what it was. So when I talked to him about Last Night of Freedom on my podcast, we talked about his book cover design and everything, and he had a whole strategy for like building kind of a branding to his books and stuff. But like the that design for his book cover, I knew who Dan was, so I was like, oh, I want to see what Dan's up to. And then I saw that book cover, and I'm like, that book cover looks great. And then I read the kind of like the little like summary of it, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting premise. And so I just dove into it. But man, he did a great job with that. But I think he's got a good plan for how he's presenting his work and like making it recognizable and stuff.
Well, I mean, again, we mentioned Adam Neville offline, and
Yep.
Dan Howarth with his branding, for want of better phrasing, is kind of going down that Adam Neville route, in the sense that each Dan Howarth cover will now be recognizably Dan Howarth. and
Yep.
each Adam Neville cover is so recognizably Adam Neville. I mean, it's called Ritual Limited, and
Right.
it is the horror equivalent. It is the literary equivalent of black metal. It is so black metal. Every cover art that his artist Sam Araya, not a relation to Tom Araya from Slayer, but same surname. Each cover is just like black metal masterpiece, and it absolutely fits Adam Neville's brand. Again, don't like the word, but we know what I'm talking about there.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought a little bit about that with my own fiction, but to be honest, with covers, I just want to be known for putting out a really bloody good cover. Like,
Yep.
it doesn't necessarily have to have an exact kind of marker that says this is definitely a Michael David Wilson book, although there's a few commonalities, particularly between House of Bad Memories and Daddy's Boy. Uh, if you look at the way that House of Bad Memories is into the gravel, then Michael David Wilson is into the floorboards on Daddy's
Yep.
Boy. Both of them have a lot of Easter eggs on the cover that
Yeah.
reference what's in the title. But for me, I just want cover art that makes you say, wow, that is a statement. So that is certainly something, when if I'm independently publishing, or if I'm with a publisher and I get a say on the cover art, which I've been lucky to have a say every single time, I don't want to skimp on the cover art, because that is your calling card. And
Mhm.
I am tremendously proud of all the covers that I've had. And, I've had two by Piper and two by Vincent Young, absolute world class cover artists. And yeah, that's my calling card, just having
Yeah.
good cover art.
I really didn't. I was excited for you when I saw Daddy's Boy, when you did the cover reveal for that, because that really pops. It's got a lot of energy, um, and it pops. It looks really slick and good. So, yeah, I was definitely excited for you when I saw that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is not the way that I think most cover artists do it, but I have been so fortunate with both Pi and Vincent Young, because they both read each of the books that they did cover up for in its entirety before creating the cover. And some people, they have a really specific idea as to what they want from a cover. I always have some ideas, but because I trust the artist so much, I'm like, right, I've got some ideas,
Yeah.
but since you're going to read it, tell me your ideas before I tell you mine, and let's see what the commonalities are and what we like about each of them. And each time there's like a lot of crossover, so it works out really, really nicely. But I mean, with Daddy's Boy in particular, so I thought this is definitely the most comedic thing that I've ever written, and I want to be able to signal that in some way that is quite larger than life. It's funny. It's a dark comedy. And so one of the things that I wanted, I mean, we did both think it would be a good idea to actually have the main characters on the cover, but I said I want there to be something neon or vibrant, and I'd like there
Yeah.
to be maybe some pink or some yellow injected into the cover. I think too, what looks so fantastic, if you have all of my books together lined up in chronological order, you've now got the very vibrant neon, the girl in the video. Then you've got They're Watching and House of Bad Memories that are more kind of understated with
They're
greens and
earthy.
dollar,
Yeah.
and then you've got Daddy's Boy that's like, oh shit, he brought back the pink. He brought it back in a big way because you don't see a lot of bright pink horror novels, especially if they don't mix with romance or fantasy. But
Hmm.
MDW is bringing the pink.
Yeah. The only
Does
thing that
that,
comes,
does that sound drunk? I don't know.
yeah, it sounds like something from Daddy's Boy.
It does, yeah. Yeah, pink
The only
being
thing
the
that,
color of a lot of the undercooked sausages, but we can get into that.
yeah, the only cover that springs readily to mind that's pink is Youth Juice by E.K. Sathu. Um,
I don't even know that, but I love that title.
yeah, it's about the beauty industry. It's like a horror. If you think the substance, like it's in that kind of
Okay.
um area of horror, probably body horror. But anyway, like it's
Mm,
a very pink because it's about the beauty industry. But your
yeah.
Daddy's Boy, not a lot of beauty industry being discussed.
I mean, there's some beautiful moments, I think. I
Yeah.
mean, Max Booth said it had the most touching and poignant and emotional dick pic scene in ever depicted in literature. So I think that's
I,
quite beautiful.
I will not dispute that. Yeah. Um, did he say that?
He said they said something like
Oh,
that. I'll have to
I'm
find.
looking at the blurbs on your website. So, contains one of the most emotionally significant dick pic scenes captured in literature.
There you go. So if that is what the listeners and viewers have been looking for, look no further. Daddy's Boy.
Well, now I'm looking at. So, David Moody gave you a really nice blurb. Max Booth the third did. Brian Asman.
Yeah.
Um, that one's really good. Danger Slater, Jasper Bark, Acclaimed Cloud Chapman. I know gave you something. Jason Pargan, who I know you guys are like best friends, like texting each other late at night.
He's been on the
Um,
show a lot. Yeah. Like the first time he was on the show, it was such a big moment for me. And it's so surreal actually. Like, you know, the amount of times that we've got to chat with one another, and the same with Dean Koontz as well. I did not send Dean Koontz a copy of Daddy's Boy to
or
answer
a
a
dick pic.
question that was not, and I did not send him a dick pic. No.
Good, probably good for the dick pic, at least. Oh,
Yeah.
Eric LaRocca too. Eric LaRocca gave you a really nice blurb.
Yeah.
Um, oh man, yeah, you and Dean Koontz are really pretty snuggly with each other too, which is great. Congratulations.
It's
I was
very,
very excited
very
for you.
surreal.
Yeah. And like you've mentioned on subsequent episodes after talking him to the first time, like you just dove right into some of the most personal shit you possibly could have talked to Dean Koontz about. Um, which I always credit you for. I think that one of the things I like, and we're moving from. So my first topic was Michael David Wilson Patreon. My second topic was going to be this is horror. One of the things I credit you with is being so bold or not backing down from talking about difficult things with for from exploring poking people about the more challenging, more maybe dangerous or scary things to talk about. Like you don't back down from that in a way that I typically do um worry about going there. So that's one of the things about your interviewing style I've always definitely appreciated is that um let's go there. Let's see where this goes. Shit, I'm gonna feel like the worst person in the world for not remembering her name. Carpenter.
Carpenter.
Um, I'm sorry, John Carpenter's wife,
Oh, Sandy King Carpenter.
Sandy King Carpenter. I feel so terrible for not remembering her name, but I remember that was a conversation too that got pretty real. It got pretty real
Yeah.
in a way that I thought was fantastic. I still haven't listened to the Jonathan Jans episode, but now I want to because like I've met him and he's so sweet and we stood in the middle of a conference room in St. Louis and I told them all about cancer. So um, I think I owe it to myself to listen to that one. But all of that rambling thing is to say that um, Dean Koontz inspired me to think about how one of the things that you're really good at with interviewing is going there, going after the stuff that might be tough to talk about, but is good to talk about.
Yeah, I think that it's important with these conversations to not just talk about writing and creativity, but I'm interested in kind of humanity and dealing with depression and just like the things that are deeper. And I think if you want to listen to a podcast where we're just analyzing or talking about the thematic concerns of a story and structuring a story, then there are other options out there, other really good options. But if you want to dig deep into, like, what are the most personal struggles that this writer has had, you probably come to This Is Horror.
Yeah.
And if I ask somebody about what their biggest struggle was and how they navigated it, there are going to be follow-ups. We're going to go
Yep.
deeper. And I mean, something I often hear on This Is Horror is it's like, like there could be a longer version, but we don't, you don't need to hear that. And it's like, no, let's hear it. Let's go there if you're
You're like,
willing. I don't start rubbing my hands together on camera. Here we go. We've hooked another one in. But I think as well, just like trying to have an understanding, and if in these conversations as well, in the guest being vulnerable, if that can help them navigate through something, or it can help somebody else navigate through something who's listening, then it's such a worthwhile thing. I've said before, if we helped you become a better writer, then that's great. But if we helped you get through a depressive episode, or we just added a little bit more light or hope and you felt a bit less alone, it's way more important. Yeah, these
yeah.
are matters of life and death. These are matters of joy and sorrow. And yeah, I want to help people.
Well, and as I've been told, being a middle-aged ish white man, that's like the person who opens up the least. That's the person who doesn't know it's okay to just talk about shit that scares you or that hurt you or those types of things. And I think giving people like an unspoken permission to just talk is something that like maybe so. And I go back to the analogy I'm going to make is like there's a whole generation of writers in like the early 2010s to late 2000s, early 2010s who discovered Chuck Palahniuk and was like, you can write that. And then they wrote that. But I feel like often that's the case in life in general, where it's like, oh, you can just talk about the things that scare you and it's not frowned on. And then people might do that more. So I think that seeing examples of that does open people up to be more kind of like emotionally honest with themselves and stuff too.
It's interesting that Chuck Palahniuk said that he thinks This Is Horror is the place where we can talk about the things that you're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
He said that on an episode. It's like, well, that is the ultimate compliment, particularly from the man who has made a career in writing about the things that shouldn't be written about, that we're not supposed to talk about. So
Yeah.
yeah, having had numerous conversations with Chuck, that's another just absolutely surreal moment. There are so many surreal moments in my life that have essentially stemmed
Yeah.
from This Is Horror and from me choosing myself, because it wasn't through my university degree. It wasn't through any of my jobs. Like everything that I've built with This Is Horror, I built it because I wanted it to exist in the world. And so sometimes when I'm having moments of self doubt or wondering what have I actually amounted to, it's like, well, you've done quite a lot. Sometimes we have to take a step back because there's this tendency that once we achieve one thing, we start focusing on what's the next thing that I can achieve. Or even worse, we look at, well, what haven't I achieved? And we need to take a step back and we need to remember what was the original dream or what did we want to
Yeah.
achieve to begin with. And, starting out and as a child, I just wanted to have a book published, just a book with my name on that I had written. And yeah, Rob is pointing to one of them. There's another two, one of which has Bob's name on too.
Okay.
And there's going to be another one, Daddy's Boy. So I have achieved that. So I should be really bloody happy with that.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't then start looking at, well, what haven't I achieved yet? And even if there are things, then it doesn't matter because there's time. There are
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
books that I'm working on. There are other little things in the pipeline, and I don't know. There's been something about this year that has meant that I've had more self doubt than ever. But what do? I keep writing in spite of it. I write more. I work harder. I get after it. I stay hungry because what else am I going to do? If I mope about and feel sorry for myself, well, I'm probably not going to make it. But if I'm hungry, if I try to achieve, if I write, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I, yeah,
There's no question mark behind giving up, right? But there absolutely is behind keeping on going. Like you don't know. But and here's the thing that I think that's great about like because we've known each other since like 2011-ish probably. Um
yeah, yeah,
we're at a place where we've been doing this long enough where like we can look back and be like look at all this stuff that we've done. And that brings up a point that I was going to mention about This Is Horror. Apple Podcast says there's 620 episodes of This Is Horror. I know that you recently celebrated the breaking the 600 barrier of like, 600 like actual episodes. I think you have had some other extra stuff that maybe bumps that Apple Podcast number up to 620. But fuck, man, that's a lot. That is a lot. And that's something to be incredibly proud of. The thing that occurred to me is do you know even how many different authors you've talked to over the last like 12, 13 years?
Well, unlike you with your meticulously kept spreadsheets, I don't have that. So
Yeah.
I I started writing a list down, particularly for another project I might have in the work, but I don't 100% know. I've spoken to hundreds of authors,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you the exact number. And you know, do you then include people that have been on? We've done a few multi-author episodes. Does that
Yep.
count as one time? Does that count as an appearance? Do they have to have had
Right.
the full This Is Horror conversation? But yeah, we've spoken to hundreds and we will speak to hundreds more, no doubt.
It's pretty incredible. I had this going back to that like we can look back and think of all the crazy stuff we've done. A group of Stephen Graham Jones fans that I'm part of were talking about like they're just like talking in general and one showed a picture of something that they acquired recently which was this kind of interview thing or something from I'm guessing the early 2010s um that featured Stephen Graham Jones and it's something that like is next to impossible to even find. But the person who published it was Pablo D'Astaire, and I was like, "Oh, I've never seen that before." Then I looked at it and I was like, "Pablo D'Astaire," and I'm like, "I remember drinking with that guy," and so I started regaling them with like this whole like that dude is like like at least at the time was like an impressive drinker and a very like very generous person and fun to be around. And this and so their perspective as people who like don't know so much are like, oh, there's this thing that's like very hard to find and it's like collectible and cool. And Rob's just like, oh yeah, I drank with that dude. Um, and that makes me feel weird because um, if you ask me, we started doing this recently, but history will tell you different. So like when you see stuff like that, history says, oh no, like you talked to Josh Mallerman 4 months after his first book came out, right? And so like to me, that's like, oh, that's life. That's how life was. But like looking back now, that is significant. And so it's cool that we have the opportunity to fill our tanks a little bit with these are the real interesting milestones that maybe at the time we didn't know were going to be interesting milestones, but now looking back at it, that's pretty great that I got to be there for that.
Yeah, it's pretty surreal to think that the first time I spoke to Josh Mallerman, he had only released Bird Box and Gassel and Yule.
Yeah.
Gassel and Yule as, I believe, a slim Kindle edition,
Yep.
but I think it might have been available in the UK paperback of Bird Box as a bonus story. I think it
Mm.
was a bonus story for one UK edition, but yeah, so then Black Mad Wheel was forthcoming and we were getting excited, like, whoa, what's this
Yeah.
one gonna be like?
Yeah.
Equally Stephen Graham Jones, like a lot of people, who haven't been around as long as we have in the scene, that they'll talk about Mongrels like that was like his big first book, and it's like, please. We were about when he was working in the relative small press.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
you
yeah.
never know who's going to really explode in terms of just popularity in terms of the mainstream. And that is why, if you're a writer and you're doubting yourself, you should keep writing. You should
Yeah.
keep buying a ticket to the lottery, which is writing a book, because every time you don't know if that's going to be the one that makes it big. I I am convinced that Eric LaRocca is going to be so much bigger in terms of being a literary giant than he
Yeah.
already is. But even if we think about how long we've known Eric, I mean, I knew him when he put out, yeah, his seminal work. Is it
Things
Things
have
Have
gotten
Gotten
worse.
Worse Since
Yeah.
We Last Spoke? It's such a long title. It's like, right, I don't want to get that. And so, and that was, I think, via Weird Punk Press. But then
Yep.
he was picked up by Titan. Now he's published by Titan and Norman Reedus's publishing company, and he's also got another one with a big publisher as well. Is it Simon and Schuster? Is it
Yeah. He's
Saint?
on
Yeah,
Saga for
Saga. So,
the
but
trilogy.
but
Yep.
but I think we're still only at the beginning
Yeah.
of Eric's journey. I don't know. He's kind of as near to a successor of Clive Barker as I think we can get, but at the same time, he's uniquely Eric LaRocca.
Yeah. 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 Eric is, and yeah, I just love how unique the things that he's exploring are, and how even though it seems like he's going in places that are very niche or very like not um universal, touches on things that everybody can understand. And I think that's like one of the things that I love about him is that I read stuff that's just way out there and I'm like, but I connect with it in a way. And I think that's some of the power of what he does. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it occurs to me. as we're talking, another reason to just keep writing and to keep going is because you never know when or which of your books will connect with a new reader and with the right person. So, for example, we were talking off air about the fact that you recently spoke with John Bassoff.
Yep.
And I listened to the interview, the start of the interview, and was so hooked that I decided I have to read this book. So I turned off the podcast to get the book. It's absolutely incredible. I will go back to the interview once I've read it. But he's written 11 or so books. He's been doing this for absolutely years. And
Yeah.
the reason that I've only just discovered him is because there's so many great authors and great books that even with our best intentions, we can't read everything. So that is
Yeah.
a reason to keep going, because I've been reading this book, The Memory Ward. Well, I love it so much. I'm going to go through his back catalog.
Yep.
So this is why I said to Eric LaRocca, in fact, because he had a moment where he was doubting what was going on with Everything the Darkness Eats and feeling a
Yeah.
bit like it didn't quite sell as much as he'd hoped it would. And I was like, but you're only at the start of your journey here. It had been
Yeah.
out less than a year. You don't know what's going to happen. You know, all it takes, I say all it takes, but when God, we do keep referencing the same people, but with Josh
I know.
Malerman. when when Bird Box was picked up by Netflix, it had
Yeah.
such a monumental effect on not only the sales of Bird Box, but the sales of his entire back catalogue. I know that because This Is Horror put out A House at the Bottom of a Lake. And
Yep.
the sales, because Bird Box was on Netflix, absolutely exploded. So you never know when your moment's going to be. And I think if you keep writing and you keep putting the work in, Rob is pointing to A House at the Bottom of a Lake. This is horror edition. We can
That's
tell
the This Is
because
Horror one.
it's
Yep.
not got the added yellow font, which
Yep.
is on the non This is horror edition. Yeah, if you keep doing it, then I think you're gonna make it. I think this is a game of longevity. If you keep doing it and you keep being authentically you, then you're going to find your people and you're going to make it.
Yeah, and honestly, the thing that I've the idea that's calcified in my mind over the years is that there is no controlling how fickle readers are and the publishing industry is. That is completely out of your control. No matter how hard you work at getting people to read your book, that's something that's totally out of your control. The only thing you can do is make what you make, and everything else, you know, you just gotta cross your fingers that people find it, people love it, people come back. But yeah, it's so fickle. Like, I've seen incredible authors um, who write a certain thing that people just aren't really into reading at the time get dropped from Big Five, and then now they're self-publishing because they don't have the sales numbers to be backed by. It's probably one of the most stressful occupations possible because there is zero guarantees. Like, at any moment, the winds could change, and that's it. You're done, and that's horrifying. That's horror. That is horror. Um, so the only thing that you can control is what you make, and love the thing you make. You know
Yeah,
that
and
got kind of dark, I think.
yeah, but the optimistic side is that if the winds changed once, they can change again.
Yeah.
So I I'm in an almost bizarre position where thus far I would say my first book, The Girl in the Video, has been my most successful. And of course, I don't want that to be the story for my entire career, that the first thing that I wrote, what was like, the best in inverted commas, the best in terms of sales anyway, the best in terms of fame, if we can use that word. But because that's happened once with the girl in the video, that means every time another book comes out, it's like this one could be the one. This one could get not only a similar reception, but it could succeed it. you
Yeah.
you never know. So of course I would love every book that I put out to sell incredibly well, and for things to get better and better and better. In a way, though, what has happened is probably quite good for me in terms of my career and my expectations, and also as a human being. So we had the first one, the girl in the video, come out and do incredibly well. That is a nice and a not necessarily typical thing for your first book to really tap into something.
Yeah.
But then the other ones, they haven't quite done as well. So that's like, okay, you can't get complacent. You can't just start churning things out because there's no guarantee. So we've got almost realism combined with what if. And it means that every release, it's one of great uncertainty, but it's also one of great possibility. And I think
Mhm.
that's a good place to be in. But I'm looking for my next big win. I'm hoping that will happen soon.
Well, that makes me think of, I want to say it was Brian Keene I was listening to on a podcast recently. And Brian Keene knows his shit um, in a lot of things, especially things that have to do with horror. And I feel like the sentiment that I got from one part of his conversation was that horror is at a place right now where there's more authors and books than there is money to spend on books. And so the person who's going to suffer most from that is someone who's publishing on independent, or someone who's not in a big five situation. So because of basically supply outpacing demand with the way that the economy is and stuff like that, it's going to be super hard for someone who's writing straight horror and who isn't on a big five publisher. Is it still five or is it four? Anyway, um, to actually like build an audience. And so that's a risky proposition too. Daddy's Boy, my friend, doesn't necessarily suffer from that concern because Daddy's Boy falls into, like you said, dark humor. And so that is a different proposition. That is a different kind of set of um, people that, if the right eyes land on it, like doesn't necessarily suffer from the kind of bottlenecking that it seems to be happening in horror right now.
Yeah,
That might be a good thing.
it might be a good thing. And I think really with Daddy's Boy, the jury is so out as to what will happen with it. And I knew when I wrote Daddy's Boy that this is a book that it could either really tap into something and get a cult following and do massively well for me, or it could absolutely plummet because what the fuck is this anyway? And what genre do you even put it in? I
Yeah.
mean, if you say horror comedy, then perhaps you think about something a little bit more kind of Evil Dead and in your face, like Jeff
Yeah.
Strand, and kind of funny monsters, for want of a better word. So it doesn't really fit into that. And a lot of dark comedy Well, I mean, first of all, there's not that much dark comedy. There's a lot of books that
Exactly.
have elements of dark comedy, but then they have a main primary genre. But I do think that this the main genre is dark comedy. So it's
Mhm.
almost standing in a category of very few other books, which is why it could go either way. I mean, my film manager, when he read it, he said, like, there were pretty much two comments. The first was, I absolutely loved this. I
Yep.
had such a good time with it. Okay, that's probably the comment to open with, because the second comment was, I have no idea how I'd sell this or who I'd sell it to, in terms of like selling the film rights, because he's more in the horror area.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so I mean, I have awareness as well that when I was querying agents, I didn't query them with Daddy's Boy. I decided to put this one out independently via This Is Horror, even though we've said maybe this is not horror, but as the name of my publisher is This Is Horror, that's what we're doing. And I did beforehand like research what are the other dark comedies, and who's publishing them. But to be honest, like I came up empty. You'd find people like Jason Pargin, but then when you look at his publisher, Jason is more the exception to the rule. And Jason,
Mhm.
there's also normally commentary on some sort of technology or social media, or that there's like a very prescient issue, or yeah, like a kind of techno or a social issue. And that's not really what Daddy's Boy is doing. It is in the daddy genre, and we're exploring, if you look on a kind of deeper level, if you wade through the sea of dick jokes, and you might have to do a lot of wading, then there is commentary on parenthood and fatherhood and what people will do for acceptance, and what your limits of loyalty to your family and to your lineage, for want of better phrasing, is. There's not really a story that has quite done it in the way that I have. Either the seriousness is very much more upfront, or the comedy is more light-hearted without these heavy issues.
Yeah.
Um, and you've also got John Niven, who writes dark comedy, but his is very much focused on, like, I mean, his biggest book, How to Kill Your Friends, um,
Yeah. Yep.
that is like about the 90s Brit pop, Tony Blair, Oasis, cocaine snorting record industry era. So that it's very much grounded in time and place. Whereas, yeah, Daddy's Boy, it's the kind of book where I feel that if I'd have released it in the early noughties,
Yep.
it would have absolutely taken off. It is very
Yeah.
much for people who like The Hangover and Napoleon Dynamite, and you know into all of that stuff. You are showing me a book called Apathy, which I have not read, but perhaps this is your recommendation right here.
Yeah, this is a book that came to mind, Apathy and Other Small Victories by Paul Nealon, which if you want to talk about, like, if you want to nail down the time frame, um let's see, 2006.
Yeah,
So
there you
exactly
go.
what you're talking about. But this book, oh, you know what another one is that comes to mind? Is a Warren Ellis book called Crooked Little Vein. I feel like that, but like I think you're right about that time frame, because like, hang on, where is that book? Now I'm going down a rabbit hole. Sorry.
So, for audio listeners, Rob is navigating to a Warren Ellis book, which he's now holding up, Crooked Little Vein. which is a book that I've heard the title. I haven't read it, so
That's
this,
2007. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So, um, same form factor, smaller, tight little reads, but definitely dark comedy. But here's what I'll say because you touched on it. Um, I think that an important thing that Daddy's Boy does as a book on the serious side is, at least for me, it challenged me on my preconceived notions of how to categorize someone as like a good father or a bad father. It didn't make it easy to necessarily slot someone into just a bad dad or just a good dad. It made me think about, because it kind of the way that it starts out, and we're into the book now. We just worked our we just side loaded ourselves into this book. The way that it starts out, there's nothing at all that makes you think that this guy Norman, who is so, all right, backing up a little bit, Wentworth is the protagonist, and he runs into this dude Norman, who winds up being his father, his long estranged father, who's never been in his life, and everything in the beginning tells you this guy sucks. Like, he doesn't give a great first impression. And as the book goes on, though, and as Wentworth is more um, exposed, and exposed we could use in different ways, to his father, like it becomes less and less easy to decide, is he a good dad? Is he a shitty dad? Where does that land? And so, amidst the humor and the antics and the ample amount of dick jokes, it really challenges you to think about. It's easy to draw a conclusion about someone. It's harder to actually learn who they are.
yeah. I think that is a good reading of the situation. And I mean that when I wrote this, it was relatively relatively soon after writing House of Bad Memories, and I was actually working on two books at the same time. I was 50,000 words deep into this psychosexual thriller, and I guess I should back up and say, so at this time in my life, I was going through the worst time of my life. I was going through a divorce and a custody battle, and I hadn't seen my daughter for a long time. I didn't see her for a couple of years. And so I was working on this psychosexual thriller, which was definitely more overtly confronting some of these issues. There was a lot of anger, there was a lot of hatred, there was a lot of despair. And I told my friend John Crinan about this book. And I also told him, well, there's one other thing. I just got this idea. And it kind of starts off with a guy who is really down on his luck. He's lining up outside the bank. He's looking for a loan. He needs to pay his landlord. He needs to also get a bit of money because he's recently lost a custody battle for a cat, which is a thing. And then as he's queuing up, there is a 50 something in an I Was On Naked Attraction t shirt, which is a popular show in the UK where contestants are looking to date someone, but the twist is that each contestant is naked and little by little body parts of the contestant are revealed. And the guy, 50 something, naked attraction t shirt, he says, what if I could offer you an honest job for £1 million? And in that situation, you should probably walk away. You should not engage with that person. But Wentworth is in a bad place. He's tried to commit suicide multiple times and he's been unsuccessful. He is down and out. He knows that this isn't a good idea, but there is a case of what if? And so he
Hmm.
goes along, and then all chaos and shenanigans ensue, and he gets caught up in a whole lot of mischief. I mean, if we talk about what genre this is, as well as a dark comedy, it's a comedy of errors, it's a comedy of absolute incompetence. So when I said that to John Crinan, he was like, "Look, I liked your other story, but this is the one that I want to read." And I don't, okay. Yeah, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that everyone should base their life or writing advice on what John Crinan wants, but in this case, it worked out quite well for me. So I thought, okay, yeah, well, I'll start writing this. And it was so fun for me uh, because it's so, even though there are serious themes, there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of metaphors, there's a lot of frozen sausages, and it I I just entertained myself, because if you want to make the reader laugh, you have to make yourself laugh too. Much like if you want to scare the reader, you have to scare yourself too. Anything you want the reader to feel, you need to feel. And
Yep.
actually writing this, and I've never had so much joy writing a book as I did with this one. So I've got this joy, but I'm also peppering it with real emotions and questions of fatherhood and wanting to do your best, but inadvertently having failed your son or your daughter. And it was such a better use of my time and a better, just a better thing for my mental state, instead of doubling down on the misery and despair, to write almost the opposite of that. And I
Yeah.
think in writing Daddy's Boy, as well as it hopefully being a massively entertaining read for other people, I think it it made life better for me. It helped me, as
Wow.
ridiculous as it is, it helped me navigate a very, very dark time of my life by writing this fun book.
That's interesting because I just had an interview with Chris Panettiere, and when we weren't talking about punching Nazis, which was a lot of the time, um, the idea of, like, we are living in fucked up times and we have to take them seriously and we have to be mad and we have to do stuff about it, but like we also have to find the thing that gives us joy to protect ourselves. And it sounds a lot like what you're saying, like giving yourself the opportunity to write this story that has a lot of levity and lets you kind of explore things in a way that the other options weren't, definitely gave you a level of, like, a life, it was like a life raft kind of thing. Like, it gave you something to hold on to or to bring you back to shore, or whatever my awful metaphor um is driving toward. But yeah, I think that that is a thing that when we're sad or angry or feeling lost, we feel like we have to just be that. But the saving grace often is giving ourselves permission to feel good about something.
Yeah, and I would love to keep writing stories like this, because it just, as I say, it unlocks so much joy. It was such a pleasure to be able to write this. And, you know, as to how much more of things in this vein I write, I think a lot is going to fall upon how successful Daddy's Boy is, what kind
Yeah.
of appetite there is. Um, so at the moment, I mean, I got a number of of books that are in various stages of progress. I have a novella that is probably, I think, 1,000 words short of actually being a novel that is it's probably the nearest thing I've written to the girl in the video in terms of the pacing and the genre. And I guess the comedy is more along the lines of House of Bad Memories, where it is there, but it's not the focus. So I've got that. That is with a publisher at the moment. That is ready to
Mhm.
go. I'm also, I mentioned John Crinnan before. We are collaborating on a novel together. It's
Oh,
very
right.
difficult to categorize, in fact, but we have said it's kind of a magical Yakuza novel set in a sleep cafe that's a little bit like if Haruki Murakami and Ryu Murakami wrote a book and it was then directed by Quentin Tarantino. So that's the little pitch for that one. We yeah, it's a 5 act structure and it's all mapped out, and that yeah, that is a very interesting process as well because we keep challenging each other and going back and forth, and I can't wait to get that one out into the world. So that's got bits of Japan and bits of comedy and almost borderlining on bizarro, which I think at times Daddy's Boy does as well. And then
Yeah.
I've started mapping out what I guess is more a traditional J horror, which would then be more going back to my roots of the girl in the video. So I think at the moment what I'm doing is I'm writing these stories that are all they're all distinctly Michael David Wilson stories in that I think every book I write is going to have quite a lot of fast-paced dialogue. I think that is a marker of a story. And then each one it's like, well, we dial the horror up more, others the comedy, and that's kind of what I'm
Yeah.
playing with. But it is interesting to write all these things and see where is the demand, where is the market. I think if I could magically decide, I'd probably just be a dark comedy writer. I think writing Daddy's Boy is the most fun that I've had, and I feel that Daddy's Boy and House of Bad Memories are probably the truest to me stories that I've
Mhm.
written. They feel most like me and what I enjoy. So it's interesting that the girl in the video is, the one that's really tapped into to something and has stretched further. But we could be in an interesting situation, which is a little bit like what happens with Max Booth to some extent, where I could possibly see me having two audiences. So we've
Yeah.
got the kind of more J horror audience, and then we've got just the weird dark comedy. And I think, with covers and with the blurb, just making it distinct. Like, look, this book is the comedy book, this is the horror book.
Yeah.
Daddy's Boy is a dark comedy. I feel the clue should be in the name. I feel that the cover gives you a sense of the lightness. I mean, how did you react when you saw the cover?
To me, like it promised antics or shenanigans or things running afoul, like um yeah. But there's absolutely like a tone of lightness to it. Um yeah, yeah. Cause like really like your eye is just drawn to Norman on that book. And and he doesn't look cool. He doesn't look intimidating or scary. He just looks like a dude who really wants to watch naked attraction.
That's what he's
uh,
about. Just
yeah.
wants to watch a little bit of naked attraction, wants to relive the 1995 to 96 glory years of Aston Villa and eat some sausages. The good life, as he says.
So one of the things, so I immediately jumped to talking about the serious father stuff because I think that my mind just wants to explore heavy, deep, emotional, meaningful themes. But doing justice to your book, and we've already talked about some of the less serious stuff. Um, there was a moment of levity that I think really um, kind of tells you what type of story that you could be in for. And it was so to give a little backstory, at the beginning, like you had said, Wentworth is at the bank. He needs to get a loan. He runs across this crazy old dude named Norman. Old, I'm almost the same age. Um, who says, "Hey, I can give you a bunch of money." Really, what it ends up being is uh, I would say, a burglary or a heist of some kind gone wrong. Which so they run afoul of this kind of like gang of criminals. And I'm going to read the names of this gang
Okay.
for our listeners. Tricky Ricky is the guy who's kind of in charge. You've got Colin, who is like a TikTok rapper. There's a dude named Pat. There's a dude named Gary. There's Wesker's sister, and that's what people call her instead of what her actual name is, which I won't give away, but I
I,
do
l- I,
know.
I love that you're saving the best to last.
And a dude named Cummy Ian. So that's levity just in itself. There's a dude named Cummy Ian, and I won't spoil why he's called that, but there is a legitimate reason. So they run afoul of this gang, and like that transgression at the beginning of the book kind of comes back later, and they have to. There's a reckoning with this crew, and at the moment when the reckoning happens, there's like a bunch of people standing around talking, and if it was like a normal person, they'd probably be really scared, um, like pissing themselves scared because this gang of people found us and is telling us they're going to kill us or whatever. And it just turns into this like back and forth of just complete nonsense where like people are there's such funny situations like Cummy Ian. I'm not going to give away too much, but like Cummy Ian coming around the like one side of the building to try and get in, and they're talking about what they should do, and he's like, "I can hear you." And they're like, "How can you hear? The window's open." So like, there's just funny stuff like that. But there's just this like kind of semantic nonsense that gets thrown into this like high tension scene where like the good guys are facing the bad guys, and so there's that brand of levity throughout the book. When you're met with tension, you are met with plenty of tension throughout, but you're also met with these moments of levity that are genuinely hilarious. And I personally see them playing out cinematically very easily. I know that you said that Ryan was like, I don't know how we would sell this, but I feel like there's a lot of cinematic moments in there, and
Yeah.
that one was definitely part of it, and it makes me think of Seven Psychopaths. I don't
Oh
know if you've seen
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I saw that years ago. And very quickly with Ryan's comment, it wasn't necessarily that he doesn't see how anybody could sell this. It was more he isn't in that world. So he
Mm-hmm,
doesn't
mm-hmm.
have the contacts just to,
Yeah.
clarify that and not inadvertently throw Ryan under the bus like he
No,
doesn't
thank you
know.
for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but so in Seven Psychopaths, there's a moment where they're like, he's like, put your hands up, and he's like, no, and he's like, what do you mean no? I don't wanna. And it was just this like devolution of a situation, and there's the showdown at the end, like the gunfight at the end has a similar unexpected levity. There's just like there's a thread of unseriousness through this very serious situation that I find very effective in comedy. And that is something that you did very well, I think, in this book.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. And God, I mean, you can see how much I enjoyed writing it, and I feel almost like God, how pretentious. Like you're reading the character names that I came up with. So it's like I did that and then I'm laughing like it's the funniest thing. But I have
Hmm.
recently been listening to the audiobook version. It's narrated by a guy called Josh Curran who's done some things for the podcast The Other Stories. I've been laughing so much through listening to his rendition, and he does do different accents for each of the
Oh, I love it.
yeah, for each of the gang members. And both Colin and Cummy Ian are described as having voices in a kind of so high my balls have yet to drop accent. And
Yeah.
I just wonder how many retakes he needed to because like if I just started speaking like that, I'd start laughing. Um, I
Yeah.
know that he did have a lot of retakes that he had to do for certain jokes because he couldn't make his way through it and like say it
I love it.
seriously. So I think there's a lot of levity, as you say, and there's a lot of lightness for people. I wonder too, though, because like that, there's a lot of very specific to the UK humor. There's a lot of references, like yeah, we I mentioned Des Lynam, and I think Rolf Harris is probably known in America, and also not in a positive light, and also John Fashanu and Andy Peters, and I wonder how did some of the British humor translate for you? Because I'm sure there were jokes where, like, maybe you didn't 100% get the reference, but did it work anyway? Like, what did you think about it?
I think through context clues, I got what the reference meant without understanding what the reference was. Um, so I think that you never leave someone totally like, what the fuck? With the possible exception of there's a section where, being the good father that he is, Norman's talking to Wentworth about pleasing a lady. And so there's a list of different oral techniques that he goes through. The ones I wrote down, I don't know if there's more, are
Please read
white.
them.
One's called Whitewater Rapids. One's just called Pancake. And then, of course, the one that I think sounds the most interesting is the angry Jeremy Corbyn. And so I was like, there's no way I read Angry Jeremy Corbyn more than once, and I'm not bringing it up on this podcast. So um, my hope is that it's just a funny thing you wrote and not a thing that really exists. But there's no way we can't clarify this.
I have recently started referencing Jeremy Corbyn in every story that I write in a vaguely funny way. But the problem is because I'm so many stories ahead of what's actually been published, I can't 100% tell you if this is the first time that Jeremy Corbyn has been mentioned in a published story. I feel like maybe he was referenced in House of Bad Memories. I am going to try and find out as we're talking. Just have a quick scan of House of Bad Memories and see if Jeremy Corbyn was referenced there. I mean, that the book is dedicated to Jeremy Corbyn, Anna Richardson, and the aforementioned John Crinan. So he's got Jeremy
He's at
Corbyn's
least
got
got a dedication. Yeah.
yeah, and God, I would love it if somehow either Jeremy Corbyn, like I assume you know who Jeremy Corbyn is. Do you know who he
My
is?
mind is. I'm well. I'm not going to cheat and quickly look it up, but my mind is telling me it's some sort of Like a political dude.
I mean, like, for a very quick reference for Americans, think of the British equivalent to Bernie Sanders. Let's put it like that.
Okay.
So that's who Jeremy Corbyn is.
All right.
So the book is dedicated to Jeremy Corbyn and Anna Richardson. Anna Richardson is the host of Naked Attraction, and
Fair enough.
it would be so funny and brilliant to me if somehow they discovered this book. Like, even if one of Jeremy Corbyn's sons just finds it and they're like, Dad, this is dedicated to you. I don't know how they'd receive it.
If anybody has Jeremy Corbyn's, is he alive?
Yeah, he's alive. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was
Mailing address.
yeah.
We'll send him a copy.
There you go. Yeah, we definitely will. Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm always doing the angry Jeremy Corbyn, and it really works."
Yeah. Yeah, that I know that there's a reference to him in the book I'm working on with John Crinan. So as I said, it's set in a sleep cafe, and then one of the characters is talking about books on sleep and lucid dreaming, and one of them is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Jeremy Corbyn. So there is a reference to him there. Let's have a little look through. I'm going to be
Is that a
very
subtle? What is that? Raymond Carver
yeah,
reference?
exactly.
Okay,
It's
I read that so long ago.
Raymond Carver, and also I can't believe it. I don't think there's a Jeremy Corbyn reference in House of Bad Memories. That is very disappointing.
Gonna have to do a new edition where you
I
look for
know.
him.
I know. I'm like almost
A
checking like
Jeremy
is it
Corbyn
yeah.
limited release.
Yeah. Wow. That's upsetting. Never mind. So yeah,
Well,
as I was saying, there's a number of references throughout my fiction to him, but it would appear that this is the first one that's actually been published. So there you go. There's
more
the
to come
first.
though.
Now, kind of like Where's Wally or Where's Waldo, depending on where you live, you got to find Where's Jeremy Corbyn in the Michael David Wilson book.
I love it. Another thing I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge, and I have to do this in a way that's not a spoiler, so I'll be as vague as possible. But there's a moment where there's a lot of carnage, and I found myself thinking that it was reminiscent of. It felt kind of Tarantino in a way, and the immediate I'm not super knowledgeable about Tarantino's full body of work, but there's that one kind of scene at the end of Reservoir Dogs where they're all holding guns on each other, and like it finally it just pops off and everybody drops. And I'm not going to say what happens in the scene in your book, but I got a similar feeling to that, and it made me think of the fact that the last time we were talking, um, it kind of came out that Quentin Tarantino is someone that you would bucket list love to talk to. And now in my mind, I'm like, was there an influence from Tarantino on that particular part of the book?
Yeah, I mean, to be absolutely clear with Quentin Tarantino, as I said the last time, he is the person above everyone else. Everyone else. Sorry, Steve, number two, that I would love to talk to out
Yeah.
of all the people on This Is Horror. And actually, I'm pretty sure I know which bit you're referring to, and that there's kind of a parallel with House of Bad Memories as well. There's another scene that's a little bit like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of riffing on that. There are a number of things where I reference them consciously, and that one is more a kind of, I thought it was more a covert reference, like it's a similar Tarantino-y situation, but it occurs to me like, no, this is very specific reference. So it's almost like an accidental homage. But
Sure.
anytime somebody compares me to Quentin Tarantino or Guy Ritchie, that is a tremendous compliment. Like, some of the best reviews for me for House of Bad Memories were when people invoke the name of Tarantino, and
Yeah.
it it was never even something I was deliberately doing, but then I would equally not deliberately shy away from it. Like, I like fast talking dialogue. I like dialogue that is progressing the story, but there's a lot of pop culture references, and
Yep.
some may say that it is circuitous, but I would argue you're just not looking at it deep enough. There are things going on
Yeah.
here. So Tarantino has become an influence. I mean, and that's probably why I like House of Bad Memories and Daddy's Boy the best out of the things that I've written, because I've really just embraced that, and I've really just become confident with what it is that I'm doing. And I think in the Sleep Cafe book, you'll see a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't. If I didn't, yeah, I mentioned magical yakuza. So yeah, like I
Yeah.
love throwing gangs in recently. It wasn't even something that I decided was necessarily going to happen, but I do like a good gang, particularly if they're slightly incompetent.
Well, so the Tarantino comp that I think the thing that works about that formula is that it's a lot of dialogue and it's tension, 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 tension to the point where it's like, is this ever going to just stop building? And then there's just this packed moment of just fucking tons of. I just hit my microphone. I think every episode I'm just going to
Apropos,
hit my microphone now. Yeah, exactly, because it's like this moment of just like boom, it just like all goes off at once, and it's so effective because you just keep feeling more and more and more tension, and you keep asking every time a second clicks by, you're like, what is going to happen? When is this going to what's going to come of this? And then it just hits you at once, and it's just like this crazy release of tension all at once. And I think that's very effective. And so like I feel like that's why it would be attractive to write something like that. On the Guy Ritchie side of it, um, you've got the kind of punchy dialogue, levity, funny stuff in a crime gritty situation, and so that comparison is also very apt. I think that the continuing action through the story has that character to it. That one scene that I'm referencing that I won't talk too much about definitely has that Tarantino build, 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 boom, and it just drops everything at once. And I think that's very effective.
when I recently watched the Netflix series The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie's The
Yeah.
Gentleman, I thought this is the nearest in a TV show to what I'm trying to do with
Yep.
my fiction. And I also thought, God damn, I wish this was a book, because comping or seeking out an
Yep.
agent or a publisher would be so much easier, because I'd basically be looking at, right, who is the agent for this author? This is the one that I'm going to talk to.
100%. Well, now you know who to get Ryan after. Just have him get Guy Ritchie on the phone, and all good.
Yeah, there you go. So,
Not nothing hard about that, right?
yeah. Yeah, so I'll get Guy Ritchie to do Daddy's Boy. We'll get Tarantino to do House of Bad Memories, and we'll get Takashi Miike to do the Sleep Cafe book that has not even been written yet. I mean, some of it's been written, but it's not complete.
I mean,
I mean, Ryan's a film manager. He can do it.
he can make that happen.
Yeah.
He will now. This is funny because this is the um so we're talking about him in relation to working with you on your stuff. But when I was at Josh Mallerman's house, he came up quite a bit in one of our conversations where he was like, I'm gonna he was texting Ryan as we were recording to talk about like ideas that we were having. So he's I think he's the most unofficial guest. Like he's the person who's been mentioned the most without actually being on the podcast. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, especially if you go for the cumulative between the Ark Party and this is horror. So it's
Oh my god, yeah.
like has Ryan been referenced on 100 episodes, but has yet to yet to appear?
Yeah, people
What?
are gonna think he's not real or something.
No, he's definitely real, but that's what someone would say if they were pretending to be Ryan all along. He's just a fictitious creation from me and Josh Mallerman.
Um, who yeah, who has really good taste in stories. Final thought on Daddy's Boy. So we talked about the serious family kind of aspects of it. We talked about some of the levity, some of the violence that's involved. We kind of covered a lot of the aspects. But the description of the book mentions a serial killer that we did not touch on at all. And there's a reason for that because I know the story, but I figured I'd see what you wanted to say about that, if anything.
I mean, much like in, I believe, the film The Vanishing, whilst events are happening on the television is the Tour de France. And so, whilst everything is playing out, there is also reports of in Mona-on-Sea, which is where Norman's holiday home is located. They have to get out of Kidderminster and they have to go to the coast because shit is getting pretty real. And there's also in the background some murders, a suspected serial killer happening in the forest very close to where Norman lives. It's playing out in the background. Is this just a bit of color that I have added, or could there be a reason for it? Is there some foreshadowing? Is that the type of author that I am? You have to read the book and find out. I mean, because you don't know. There's some things that I foreshadow in House of Bad Memories. There's also a reference to Annabelle Chong. She doesn't turn up at the end. So you're going to have to find out for yourself. It's a good reason to buy the book or pre order it.
Absolutely. I will say, and I hadn't said it before, but of everything I've read of yours, I feel that this was, I worry about cliche terms like approachable. But man, this one just got me bought in quick, and I was really, it, something about this specific book fucking just did it for me in a way. And I mean, I loved House of Bad Memories. I love Girl of the Video. I love They're Watching. I love reading your stuff. This one, it might be my favorite one so far, and I think it's the recipe and the way that you put it all together and cooked it into this like thing that I got to read. But yeah, man, like you didn't overdo it on the funny stuff. You didn't overdo it on the criminal gangster stuff. You found a way. You didn't overdo it on the the familial strife kind of thing. It all just worked very well together. It all mixed well together, and I think you did a fantastic job. And the thing that I think I like the most about that is that you also said how good it felt to write it. And so maybe there's something there. You felt so good writing this, and it felt really good reading it. And so I think that makes me happy that it's just a good feeling thing in general.
I mean, this is amazing to hear. And I did note that up until this point, you hadn't actually said whether you enjoyed the book or not. And I
Yeah.
was like, shall I ask Rob on air? Shall I ask him off air? And, but between us, we can kind of take whether we do or don't like something. Back in the day, me and John Costello reviewed the book anthology in front of you, and some of the stories we liked and some of the stories we didn't, and we were
Yeah.
very upfront about that. That's not necessarily how I would do things these days with distant horror, but
Right.
yeah, I am so glad to hear that you enjoyed it, and that you found it so accessible, because the jury is very much out in terms of how people are going to respond to it. And I feel like I don't know how people are going to
Yeah.
react to this. As I said, if it was in the noughties, I'd have a better idea. There probably, well, almost certainly there will be people who absolutely hate it and wish it didn't exist, and probably find it offensive. Equally, there will be people who have a really good time with it. I'm glad that you're part of them, but yeah, because it's so difficult to categorize as well, and because it's not quite in horror. I just
Hmm.
think if people enjoy dark comedy movies, they'll probably enjoy this book, would be the best way to put it. And there are a lot of people who do enjoy dark comedy movies. And so I think that's why, again, the cover art was so important, because I wanted to set people's expectations. And that again links back to why I created the Michael David Wilson Patreon, because I don't know, if I started promoting Daddy's Boy on This Is Horror, it felt like this might be a step too far,
Hmm.
just a step too much out of horror. But yeah, the early reviews and blurbs have been tremendously favorable, and people really seem to be kind of getting what it's about. Uh, I'd certainly agree that it really jumps in to the story. I mean, in chapter one, you know exactly what this dilemma, this ultimatum is that
Yeah.
Wentworth has, and then it just gets progressively, I don't even know, weirder from there. He is into the adventure, whereas House of Bad Memories, which I'm narrating at the moment for the Patreon, it does take a little bit of time to be like, okay, what is going on? What are we dealing with here? Um, they're watching. There's a little bit of build up, but because it's a shorter novel, I think we get into it fairly quickly. The girl in the video, uh, there's a slower build, even though it's such a short book. But
Yeah.
this one, Daddy's Boy, we're right into the thick of it on page one. And also, I mean, yeah, with the novella that I've got, that, yeah, that gets into it on page one too. So if that's
Yeah.
what you like, I mean, it should be what you like, is good storytelling. Then hopefully you're gonna like what I've got coming later. But yeah, I mean, was the book unexpected? How did you find going from House of Bad Memories to Daddy's Boy? Because on one hand, I definitely think the girl in the video and they're watching are a pairing, and you could put House of Bad Memories and Daddy's Boy as a pairing, but House of Bad Memories is the kind of uglier, kind of
Yeah.
darker fiction brother, whereas Daddy's Boy is the light to the dark. And I don't know, maybe some
Yeah.
people who wanted chapter 23 will be disappointed that Daddy's Boy didn't get quite as extreme.
Oh man. No, I think you got it exactly right. Because there are moments in House of Bad Memories that absolutely do the same kind of thing that you get in Daddy's Boy, but I feel like just overall the tone is a lot darker in House of Bad Memories, whereas Daddy's Boy is I don't want to say it's like an opposite. I don't want to say it's like a action reaction kind of thing, but it's just it's balanced differently in the in the other direction, but to good effect. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone?
So
Yeah.
this is the pitch. This is the end of the episode. So now this is it. We are recording. It's, March 19th. It's March 19th. The publication date for this is May 6th, which means that there is plenty of time by the time this posts for you to get pre-orders in. And pre-orders are crucial. Pre-orders, day of, all that, crucial to the success of a launch of a book. So I think everybody should do that. I'm assuming there's going to be a print version, ebook. Is audiobook also going to be available at the same time for release?
Yeah, they're all going to come out the same day.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, man, yeah. If any of the things that came up in this conversation speak to you as a listener or viewer, the Guy Ritchie, the Tarantino moments, the random books that we mentioned and stuff like Apathy and Other Small Victories, Crooked Little Vein, if any of that speaks to you, I absolutely recommend checking this out for sure. And
Yeah.
I guess, dude, Michael, I've known you for 13 years. You are a brother. We've came up in this weird we built this weird fucking industry together. And it's always just so rewarding to spend time talking to you. And so thank you for that. But thank you also for giving me such a great story to read.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's just such a privilege to know you. And I'm a great admirer of what you do. You're a big influence on This Is Horror podcast. And I mean, you won a number of Podcast of the Year awards with Booked. And so, actually, very soon, we will be announcing the shortlist for the This Is Horror Awards 2024. And so, I haven't announced anything anywhere. But what I will be announcing is, as part of that, the Nonfiction Podcast of the Year, one of the podcasts that will be up for an award is the Arc Party. So you are on the
Yeah.
shortlist. And this is the first time I've even mentioned any shortlist, any nominees. So you are on that ballot. It will be public very soon. It is very much deserved. And thank you for all the great work that you're doing. If people are listening and they're not subscribed to the Arc Party, you've listened to 2 hours now. You've got to hit that subscribe button. Also, go over to the YouTube because there's a video version. You should subscribe to that as well. It really does help out. If you have a bit of time, leave a review on Apple Podcasts for the Arc Party. It's a brilliant show. The next episode will be brilliant as well, I am sure. So keep reading, take care of yourselves, and until next time with Rob Olson, but not with me, have a great day.